Well, hello. We are here to talk a little bit about Egypt, and I happen to have this piece in my personal collection. Is it an original? No, it is a duplicate, obviously, but it comes from a fairly well-known studio. It has a certificate of authority, right, of authenticity, but these are actually from Egypt. And they do talk a little bit about how they attempt to reproduce these. All right. So they get artists, and these are handmade, which is pretty cool. So now that we've done that, let's talk about this particular piece. This is a very common piece that is a Last Judgment piece. So we have a pharaoh here, perhaps Seti I. This is found in a lot of pharaonic tombs, and he is being presented to Osiris, the god of the dead, and Osiris's wife, Isis. And this is their son, Horus, the falcon-headed god that represents kingship and the divine element of kingship. So here is what we have. So the story is of Osiris. And Osiris was one of the very early deities. He was the son of Nut and Geb. They are actually siblings, but that's kind of how it works in the early years. And essentially, Osiris and Isis end up as a couple, and they end up as civilizers. They go down to ancient humanity, and they teach them how to cultivate grain and become civilized and how to dress, etc. And unfortunately, Osiris had a brother who was very, very jealous of him. And that brother's name was Set. And Set represented the desert, the harsh elements of nature and death. So one day, Set decides to have a party, and he invites all of his siblings, including Osiris and Isis, but he has a plan. And that plan is to offer a coffin, this beautifully studded coffin, to anybody who could fit into it. Now, of course, the coffin is built for this fellow, for Osiris. But all the gods try it on until Osiris finally gets in, and of course he's the perfect fit. And Set slams the door shut, and he throws it out into the wilderness, so Osiris is effectively captured and dead. Well, Isis, as a good wife, and this should sound a little bit like the Demeter story, she goes out searching for her husband, and she has many adventures. She does eventually find her husband, and they get back together. She releases him. Well, Set this time is even more upset, and so he basically kills Osiris again, and this time he chops him into 14 pieces, which he throws into the Nile. And Isis then spends a great deal of time finding all of her husband's body parts and putting them back together. Now, the problem is he's missing one very significant male element that has either been eaten by a crocodile or a hippo. But Isis is not deterred, and so she magically brings Osiris back to life for one super hot night of immaculate conception. So you figure out how this works, but she manages to get pregnant with this fellow. And it makes sense that if Horus is the god of kings, essentially, of the pharaohs, that he would come from the cultivators. So essentially, once Osiris is resurrected, he goes into the underworld where he becomes a judge of the dead. And of course, he's carrying his shepherd's crook, which is kind of interesting. You also see that with the pharaonic being a shepherd or leading people, right? And so kind of a unique little story. So here is our pharaoh being judged before death. And of course, he gets his own personal escort here with Horus. Now, just a couple of humanities elements to notice here. Number one, the ancient Egyptians canonized their art. So they knew they were the top dog in the Old Kingdom, and they loved it. So they canonized their art. And so this is a piece of canonized art. what this means is that all future art is going to be designed like this, right? It's like comic book art. You recognize comic book art immediately. Same thing here. So a couple of things to look for is whenever we want movement, we have left foot forward movement. This is symbolic of walking, right? But notice that these figures are really very static. They're very still. So this is our one indicator that they are moving, right? The second thing is that females are always going to be lighter than their male counterparts. Women of high class were supposed to kind of be inside and therefore less tanned, so they should have lighter skin. The third thing is this odd profile image. So these heads are in profile, the legs are in profile, but what do we do with these torsos? If you tried to stand like this, it's very difficult. So the torsos are always in full view, even though the head and the lower body is in profile. That's a very distinctly Egyptian style. And of course, we also get other symbols like the Ankh here, the pharaonic crown with the cobra. We get Egyptian writing. Technically, it's a pictographic writing. So all of this is actually quite interesting, isn't it? Now, this particular piece is being held down by my own little set of canoptic jars. Canoptic jars are related to mummification, just like Osiris. Osiris is sometimes shown as a green god representing death. So the canoptic jars were actually used to hold various forms of entrails, and they are depictions of the four sons of this guy, of Horus. And so you get the jackal-headed son, and you're going to see the jackal-headed being also with Anubis, who is called a psychopomp. Anubis is the guy that leads the souls of the dead to the underworld. He's very unique for that. We have the human-headed here, right? And then we will also have kind of a baboon, and once again, the hawk or falcon. Now, these are interesting because the canoptic jars are pretty much meant to be looked at really in one direction. Even though these are also 360, you'll notice that most of the 3D art is very much visual and active in one direction, but pretty plain in the rest. So, there you go. A little bit more about Egypt. Hello, and welcome to my backyard, where my neighbor has decided to very noisily work outside, but hopefully we won't pick too much of that up. We're actually here to talk about this plant. This is a little bit of a bloom, but do y'all know what this plant is? If you guessed papyrus, you guessed correctly. Now, this is going to be fairly important because when it comes to papyrus, we ought to think almost immediately of the Egyptian culture. And of course, the video that I made depicting a papyrus script. All right, so this is actual papyrus plant. Part of the reason why this is so important is that papyrus was a very hardy plant, and it still is. I mean, this thing gets very little care from me, and it continues to grow, which is great. It is plentiful, and essentially, once you harvest it, you can pulp it. And pulping it basically means you cook it, grind it up, add a little paste, and flatten it out, and you get paper. So papyrus paper was very important. It was a very easy way to get paper to preserve writing, which of course is going to be a very strong element of what we see in Egypt. It was something that was traded. Scrolls sometimes are made of papyrus, and we are still finding mummies, which is kind of cool, that have papyrus stuffing that quote things like the Iliad and ancient Greek writers. Now, the alternative to this particular type of paper was essentially vellum. Now, this is not vellum. This is a replica of the Dead Sea Scrolls. but it was written on vellum. Now, vellum is much more expensive because the way that you get this is through animal skin. It's usually lamb or sheep skin, so you have to kill the animal, skin it, scrape everything off. Usually it included putting a lime type of treatment on there to dry it out. You had to stretch it and let it dry, and then you could cut it into pieces. But imagine the cost of that versus mass production here with a plentiful plant that's easy to grow. So remember that the ancient cultures, of course, are going to utilize their own resources. They're going to be very happy to do so, and that is what gives us some of these cool things we have today.